I always dry fit everything before I glue or do anything. This is the parts that will hold the wings on that go in the fuselage right here. Oops. I haven't sanded them yet. But I put the blind nuts, claw nuts, same name for those parts. Some people call them claw nuts, some people call them blind nuts. They've been fitted into the plywood. Got two of those, front and back. This motor mount worked out much better than I thought it would. Although there were no screws, bolts, or anything for the motor mount in the kit. I got plenty of them around here. This worked out much better. Didn't have to worry about there being a gap between these two parts because this hole in the back part compensates for that. This also are M3 claw nuts, blind nuts, claw nuts, whatever you want to call them. Might could have used just a little bit shorter screws, but that worked out really well. It's going to work really well. I like it. So my worry about these sticking up was completely unfounded. Now I've got to take it all back apart, apply a little epoxy to these claw nuts and these claw nuts. Let it set overnight. These screws, these four screws, and these four screws have to have Loctite applied to them and let dry overnight. Probably won't do that tonight. Just dry fitting it all together to make sure of things. So now we start sanding the surfaces of all the foam so to get a good adhesion. All the ones that are going to touch, sand those. Sand underneath here where the wing things are going to go on. Sand back here where the top plywood for the rear landing gear is going to go on. Sand the tops of these where they're going to touch the foam. I might do that tomorrow. It's almost 9 o'clock Sunday night. So I was real pleased about the way this eventually came out. I hadn't thought about this hole being in the part that glues into the fuselage, but that worked out real well. Don't know if I'll find some shorter M3 nuts, bolts for that or not. It'll just stick in the foam of the fuselage. Back in this area, actually looks like there's a little slot in there for that type of thing, so it won't be a problem at all. Oops. Yeah, that's exactly what those slots are for. How about that? This actually goes in this way. Yep. That's those slots in there are precisely for that those screw links. So that's all going to work out really, really well. It even feels good anchored in half the fuselage. Well, I'm breaking down this motor assembly so I can sand this rear motor mount that's going to be glued into the fuselage. And I did get shorter screws. The screws I was using are these right here. They're 15 millimeters. And this screw right here is 10. It's actually 11. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be 12, but it's not. Or my calipers are uncalibrated, one or the other. So this screw with a washer on it is what we'll put in this motor mount in place of these other 4. It really isn't needed, just to keep them from sticking out the back. And there's one of the other screws put in, and as you can see, it almost comes out the back. Very small amount of space, so it comes far enough through that claw nut with a washer on it to not only not stick out the back, but have good grip. So that's the way I'm going to do it. And we can go ahead and take these bolts out of this unit. This particular motor mount doesn't have to be sanded, but these bolts do have to have Loctite put on them. And I look down in here, that's where one of the bolts goes through the back. Look down in here with a magnifying glass, and I have a lighted magnifying glass on a stand over here. The tips of those screws are well away from those windings, so there won't be a problem there. And these are shorter than those others. And let's see here what my non-calibrated calipers think they are. I think they're 8.9 millimeters, so I would call it 9. So they're 3 millimeters shorter than the other ones that are used in here. These also need to have Loctite on them, so I'll go ahead and do that. And we'll put this part of the motor mount in here for safekeeping, along with the motor itself. That won't be needed anymore till well down the line. And I'll go ahead and get some Loctite on these, and we'll store those away for quite a bit further down the line. Well, there's all the screws painted up with blue Loctite, ready to dry overnight, and then I'll store them with the rest of the motor parts in here until they're needed. Like I say, that'll be a little ways down the road. Next thing I need to do is glue these claw nuts in here. I thought maybe they wouldn't need to be glued in. Some plywood I've worked with, you can hammer the claw nuts in and they just kind of grip. Don't really have to do much. One of the many talons, though, when I was putting the claw nuts in the plywood like this for the motor mount, just shattered the motor mount. So I had to drop back, find one on the Thingiverse and 3D print it and use it. These places where these claw nuts go into this model on both the wing plates, you can kind of see how loose that is in there. They actually were coming out when I was just playing with this, trying to situate this piece in the fuselage for dry fitting. And the reason for that is, you can see on this one, they were nice enough to drill, scribe, whatever. They've got holes here for the claws to go into, which keeps it from splitting the plywood, which is why it's really wonderful. The downside to that is they can't just be hammered in. One of them, they would fall out quickly in the build itself. You probably could get them and stick them back up in there unless they fell on the top of your flight controller, and shorted it out, which is unlikely because of how long the screw is and how far it'd be screwed in. But what the hell is wrong with just putting a little epoxy on these four and these four? This comes later. This is the landing gear bottom plate that has, actually it's the top plate that goes inside the fuselage. It'll have claw nuts in it. This is the bottom plate for the rear landing gear. Doesn't have the claw nut holes scribed out. And this goes on the bottom. Screws come through the bottom, go up through the claw nut, and any excess length is inside the fuselage where it can get caught on your ESC. I'll look at replacing the rear landing gear bolts with shorter ones or cutting those others. So again, this is the rear landing gear bottom plate, top plate, and you can see these areas where they made for these claw nuts. It's just real easy to push the excess wood. I think it's laser cut myself because of the color of the wood. I think they laser cut the 4 holes and they laser cut this center hole. It's just my opinion, but once those are pushed out, you see I pushed these 2 out. These 2 have still got a little blockage in them. Claw nuts just don't grip like they do on just straight plywood. But again, with just straight plywood, you got the problem of the claw nuts splitting the plywood. So let's epoxy up these 8 and set them aside to dry overnight. Well, there you go. There's those 4 epoxied up, and I was holding the claw nuts on the side and trying to dab in epoxy on the claws and rotate it like this, and of course some of the bristles on the brush tried to get up over the collar and down on the inside, but we'll see how that turns out. I don't think I got much on the threads. So that's 5-minute epoxy. I'll let it sit overnight. That'll be ready to install. That pretty much finishes the prep on putting the 2 fuselage halves together. They're ready to be glued together, except for sanding the foam. Which, as you notice in this video, I've just kind of procrastinated on sanding everything. It shouldn't take long. Gotta sand the edges of the motor mount, just barely around the edge here on each side. Won't take 5 seconds probably. And this edge doesn't touch anything, so no big deal there. And again, these claw nuts were hammered in, and they've got enough grip that they won't be coming out. They don't have to have epoxy in them. This one, just because you're coming down through the top of the airplane to screw into those claw nuts, you'll be pushing on them down and pushing them out if you don't glue them. So I highly recommend gluing those 4. Okay, I'm going to let this set all night. It's Tuesday night. Yeah, I didn't do much yesterday. Didn't do a whole lot today. Just what you've seen on this video. It was 50 degrees today here, so the basement, I could get it warm enough for this epoxy not to be just a terror to work with and cold. We had 3 nights of 10 degrees. Friday it's supposed to be 66. If the wind blows up from Florida, we have warm weather here. If the wind blows down from Canada, we freeze to death. It really is weird around here. Plus, being up in altitude as high as we are doesn't help at all. Strange. Didn't used to do that when I was growing up here 60 years ago. It was cool from Halloween to 1st of March. There were no summer spells of 66 degrees. Now there are. All right. Again, I'm still procrastinating that sanding. I buckled down and sanded all the surfaces. It didn't take that long. So, So now these are sort of pre-placed. I'm going to go ahead and glue these into this portion and glue the main part of the motor mount in the back and let this half set overnight, and then they'll be there for closing up the other half and gluing up the fuselage probably tomorrow. I'm going to use U-hoop ore on these three parts and kind of clamp them with these clamps. The motor mount doesn't have to be clamped. Okay, those three parts are glued in and it's going to set till tomorrow. Got them kind of clamped up there so they can get in the position they need to be in, and then tomorrow we'll glue these two halves together. Kind of slow going here. I just want to let that set so it cures. Well, it's only about 5 hours later, but the glue seems to have set up well enough, so I'm going to go ahead and put the two halves together. I've got my blue painter's tape to wrap around it ready here, and my wife's going to help me put the two halves together. Well, I am going to let that set until tomorrow. I'll let the first half set for about 5-6 hours, and I'm going to let this set overnight, and then we'll take the blue tape off of it. Now I am going to deviate at this point a little bit from the assembly instructions here. They basically have you build the fuselage, then the wings, then the tail, and put it all together, and then do your setup. Show you the parts. There is some more carbon fiber spars than this shows. There's two small, very thin ones that go in the flaps. I'll show those and speak about them again at the time. These are the wing spars. This goes in the center of the wing spars. These are also wing spars for the rear of the wing, and this goes inside them, and this is the booms. There's two very, very small carbon fiber rods included in the kit now. This only shows one piece for the landing gear. There's actually two. This doesn't show both of them like it shows both the wing pieces. And these two that they show two are not anywhere like what the diagram here shows they are. And no decals come with it anymore. So we start out with fuselage assembly. They talk about putting they call them T-nuts. T-nuts, blind nuts, claw nuts, all the same thing. And I will be gluing the ones in for the landing gear inside the fuselage. These didn't have to be, and they'll always be screwed in with the motor, so there'll be tension on them. It ain't like these where taking the wings on and off, you can push these out through the bottom when you're going in there and trying to get the threads started. This is actually what's included in the kit now, and I installed it in that position. I kind of glued it together this way and let it set for about 6 hours, as you saw, and then I put much more blue tape on it than they did, and I've got a pretty good seam there, getting better than most of my others. Now I'm not exactly going to continue this fuselage the way they say. I will probably put this nose gear mount in. I think I won't use epoxy. I'll use U-hoop ore.
Afraid epoxy, as hard as it is, might crack, or the U-pore being kind of an elastic glue may give and stress a little without breaking loose. So I will go ahead and put this in the bottom, but I'm not going to do the rear landing gear like this because I'm going to keep this fuselage the way it is so I can balance this thing laterally when I get the wings and everything put on. And I'll put this plate on last and this plate on last just before I start putting the electronics in it. So again, I can balance it laterally. So I won't be doing this part until the end. It's fairly straightforward. Yes, if I do this, then it'll be hard to balance it laterally. Although I could balance it on this wheel and also on the V part of the tail with the rod sticking up out of a board, but I will do that at the end, totally at the end, but I'll do some lateral balancing just with this fuselage bare the way it is here. That's why I'm going to deviate a little bit. Then they have you put the canopy on, cockpit, whatever. Do the front area to mount a gimbal and these 4 holes, and then this is to keep let the battery tray, which is seen right in there, slide back and forth and tighten down. Don't know if I'm going to mount my camera on this and leave this open, or if I will do it like this and mount it to the bottom of this. Still have that decision to make. I'm not going to use a GoPro in it because I'm going to be using a 4K flight camera. There's the battery tray with the screw that goes through this claw nut and lets you adjust the battery tray forward and rearward for CG. With the motor mounted here, and this is exactly the parts that come with it now. Putting the screws through this again. We'll keep those claw nuts in this. But this is screwed to the back of the motor right now. And then this will be screwed to the other motor mount through these 4 outside holes. That all actually did work out quite well. ESC will go in as part of the electronics. So basically, I probably will put that plastic piece in before I finish this video on the fuselage tomorrow after it cures overnight. But that's as far. I'm not going to go any further with the landing gear right now. So basically tomorrow we'll start working on these wings, it looks like. Got some interesting things to do in this part. I'm just going to rush over it right now. There are actually, I was playing with the pods. They actually have a definitely right and left pod. Get the wrong one on and you're going to get this. Put them on correctly, you will get it straight across to the back, but I'll show that as we build the wings. I did get some information here on my CG. Will be coming up here in a second. Here's the tail build, fairly straightforward. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to use 2 servo wires down both booms or 1 and a Y connector. I think I'm going to put it down both booms, but we will be getting to that in the future. And again, this is all about building the tail. And this is the part, this will be the bottom part underneath the tail. And like I say, I could put a rod right here to pick the rear landing gear up, and will to finish the lateral balancing here and on the nose wheel. But I'm going to leave the gear off right now for the first lateral balancing. Not sure I like these too much, mostly just because I don't trust my ability to put it together. We'll get to this. There it is. Tail booms, front wings, rear control surfaces, one piece. And there's the finished airplane. Now then, I found in here, here's my CG 45 millimeters. The reason I like to have it in millimeters is because I have a CG machine and it actually sets up with millimeters, and I'll show that eventually on this airplane when I do final checks of the CG. Now, one thing I thought was very strange about this is this isn't from the leading edge of the wing, or you can call it the leading edge of the wing if you want to, but the slat, this front flap device, is in front of this, and right now it's actually blocked up with a piece of foam. So it's actually from behind this slat right here, where there's just a square leading edge, which is to me not a leading edge of the wing, back 45 millimeters. So what I've got to get for my CG machine is from here all the way to the front. So I'll have to measure that with a caliper. Or we can see here that that's 80. I have to zoom in on this. 83.5, 84 millimeters. Probably what I would set the CG machine on for doing this. But that's way down the road. But I was happy to get this. Now, the right-hand rule of thumb is a third of the way back from the leading edge. The also other right-hand is the spars. Let's see if I can find a picture of a spar here. The CG, those spars are in there in most airplanes at the CG. Come on. So that's the rear spar, so that doesn't count. So here's the front spar. Here's the leading edge of the wing. So it is not 45 from here back to here. It's 83.5, 84. From right here to here is the 45. In general, you can pretty much stay out of trouble if you just go right straight down the center of this spar for CG on almost all wings, and all the way back to the rear edge of this spar. And they say in this instructions to set it up more near the rear of the spar for first flights, so it's a little nose heavy. We all know that a nose heavy plane won't fly well, but a tail heavy plane will not fly at all. So yeah, I don't have a better picture of that anywhere. Nope. So we will break off the blue painter's tape off the fuselage and take a look at it tomorrow to finish up this video. But aside from mounting the front landing gear nylon, this here, I'm going to stop at this step. I'm not even going to put the wooden pieces in the back for the rear landing gear. I'll just do this piece tomorrow after I take that tape off and finish up this video.
Okay, I also did go ahead while I had the Yoo-hoo pour out and put the plywood for the rear landing gear in using Yoo-hoo pour. So that's as far as I'm going to go with that for now, and that's as far as I'm going to go with the front landing gear for now. So tomorrow morning, after this sits all night, we can kind of be finished with this for a little while. Well, there we go. That's as much as I'm going to do with the fuselage now. 3 of my bolts really stayed clean. Didn't get any Yoo-hoo pour in them or anything, but one of them did. Kind of got it out of the threads with some elbow grease and some isopropyl alcohol. I think now it'll be, yeah, That one's good. Take a look at this one. Oops. This one's got just a little bit in the threads right there. You can see it. Yeah. Like I say, a little isopropyl alcohol gets that out fairly easily. The other two seem to be fine. Not much in this one. I'm very pleased with the seam on this fuselage. It's one of the better ones I've done. I guess, hopefully, I get better and better with each model I build. Not much glue sticking out of the seam, and the seam's fairly tight. So I'm very pleased with that. Get this U-hoop pour out of these threads on this bolt, and it will be a complete success. And it actually pulls out. Yeah, so that's not much of a problem at all. Already got most of it out. Alright, so I'm going to set this fuselage aside for a while now. Canopy, cockpit, whatever. This area, closing it up with the magnets and stuff will be fairly simple. So I'm very, very pleased with that. The motor mount came out very good. I do have just a little U-hoop pour in this hole up here, but that will, yeah, it's not really inside of it. Got a little excess in the bottom right there, but that's about it. Overall, give myself an A+ on this one. Let's say one of the better ones I've ever done. So that's basically the fuselage, as much as I'm going to do on it now. So now we'll move on to the wings. Thank you guys.